Hello everyone, thank you for your patience. I was supposed to start this about an hour ago, obviously, and then when I finally did start it, the audio wasn't working. Excuse me. And all of a sudden, just the fatigue from... I was doing fairly well today. I had a rough morning, and then in the afternoon it was a little bit better, and then all of a sudden, just after that last conversation, just absolutely totaled. So I don't know how far we're going to get into this, but we're going to try. Let's see if we can't get the brightness up a little bit here. I'm a little dark. That might not be something I can actually manipulate once the stream has started, but we'll try. Here, let's see. Oh, yeah, it looks like we can. Let's get the contrast up a little bit. Just to make sure I'm as spooky as possible. There we go. It's kind of... That's unpleasant. Let's make this a little bit more human-colored. Oh, that's worse. That's worse. Much worse. Brightness down. Oh, wait, it's saturation, not contrast. That's what I want. There we go. I'm not dead anymore. And we'll bring contrast down a little bit. That'll do. Whatever. Stop wasting your time with trivialities like that. Okay, so... I am going into this blind, but apparently a lot of people are upset by it. It is a video by Contrapoints called Envy. I can imagine why people are upset by it, but I have no notion as to the particulars. And it's an hour and 48 minutes long. I am not going to go through the whole thing, so it is distinctly possible. By the end of this, I will remain ignorant of the particulars. So if anybody wants to... Oh, thank you, Sid. Yeah, I moved my desk to my library, quote-unquote. My apartment is not big enough to have a library, but here it is. So you're not looking at my sterile bedroom anymore. We actually have a background that showcases how intellectual I can be. No, but it's much better. Plus, it means I can stream later because I'm not disturbing people. Yeah, so if anybody wants to fill me in on where I should jump to as this video goes on, this thing is bloody long. Like, I'll give her credit. She makes like 5 videos a year, but they're big uns. But yeah, without further ado, we'll go through this, my 3rd stream of the day. Just let me die. Alright. 3, 2, 1, let's go.
So, April 27, 2017 was the greatest day in the history of twitter.com.net.gov. I realize that to you children, Twitter is an app, but to us MILFs, it remains a website. We have to dial in. Hello, operator. Connect me to hell. This was the day that Fire Festival, a luxury music event hosted by Ja Rule and some charlatan, was scheduled to begin on a private island in the Bahamas. There was a lot of hype. Kendall Jenner and Bella Hadid endorsed the festival on Instagram. There was a promo video full of supermodels. Tickets were selling for thousands of dollars. One Twitter thread summarized the marketing as exclusivity, conspicuous consumption, and many, many promises of excellent selfies for your already insufferable Instagram. So, when the day arrived and the advertised best in food, art, music, and adventure turned out to be 2 slices of pallid American cheese languishing over sliced bread in an atmosphere that can only be described as muddy third world shantytown. I mean, if you weren't on Twitter that day, I don't think you can even imagine the revelry.
Just learned about Fire Festival, aka Ja Rule's concentration camp for Instagram models and rich white kids.
Yuppie Hunger Games hosted by Ja Rule.
Finish your food, there's starving millennial influencers in Fire Festival.
Instagram entitled Rich Kids. Meet Lord of the Flies.
Let them eat salad.
It was a shuddering climax of pent-up class rage. You know, maybe millennials couldn't get Bernie Sanders elected, but at least those sandwiches were garbage. Jamila Jamil is an English actress who's just extremely pretty.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't remember that being like a big class thing. I thought it was just people were laughing because it was frivolous. You know? It was frivolous and stupid, which it was. Skip to 126 if you get bored for a fundamental misunderstanding of Marxism. I think we passed 126. I didn't notice anything that really had much to do with Marxism, but I think I might have been dozing a little bit. Takes a while before she says much of anything. Well, good. Low work for me.
Imagine looking like this. Imagine being perfect. Why are you doing this to me, Jamila? Why are you doing this to women? One day on Instagram, an ordinary peasant told the queen Jamila, "Your skin is so perfect, uwu." And Jamila replied, "My skin is currently clear because A, privileged people have more access to good quality nutrition, and also our lives are significantly less stressful than those with less privilege. I also get to sleep more because of this. All of these things keep my hormones in balance, and I'm able to address food intolerances easily. B, I believe that trans rights are human rights. C, I exfoliate twice a week." Oh boy. Jamila, they're gonna cut your head off, Gorge. I'll protect you, queen.
Could she be any more annoying?
Someone wondered on Twitter to 77,000 likes.
This trend of fake self-awareness legit makes me want to rip my hair out.
Now look, to be fair, everything Jamila said is true. Being privileged does make it easier to spend time and money on cosmetics. But Jamila's acknowledging this recitation of all the complex socioeconomic factors that account for why she's prettier than you, doesn't take any of the sting out of inequality, does it? And that's kind of at odds with what activists used to say, which is that you should check your privilege. A suggestion which the privileged seem to have taken to heart, since the rich and famous now go around delivering these orations on how fortunate they are compared to the rabble. And this of course turns out to be far more annoying than when they acted oblivious to it. I don't have any beauty secrets. I guess I just drink lots of water. Take me, mother. A similar scandal occurred when Kim Kardashian tweeted about her birthday party at the height of the coronavirus pandemic.
40 and feeling so humbled and blessed. There is not a single day that I take for granted, especially during these times when we are all reminded of the things that truly matter. After 2 weeks of multiple health screens and asking everyone to quarantine, I surprised my closest inner circle with a trip to a private island where...
Is this going to be Marxists are just envious of Kim Kardashian? Because I understand why people are angry then. That's dumb. Is that actually what the controversy is? Am I watching an hour and 48-minute long video to get to leftists are just, they just wish they had Kanye West's mansion? This is such a slow burn. And it's not an interesting slow burn either. This is... Someone tell me the video is not like this all the way through.
we could pretend things were normal for just a brief moment in time. I realize that for most people, this is something that is so far out of reach right now. So in moments like these, I'm humbly reminded of how privileged my life is. Hashtag this is 40. Tag me, bitch.
So like Jamila, Kim is attempting some kind of privilege-checking maneuver, and once again, it has not gone well.
You are the Marie Antoinette of the 21st century, bragging about being humble and letting us eat cake.
Millions of Americans sick and suffering, standing for hours in food lines and being evicted as you flaunt your wealth and privilege? Your tweet made 10 times worse by hashtag tone-deaf, humbled and blessed line, hashtag gross.
Happy birthday. I hope somebody got you an alphabet.
See, I don't think these responses are built out of envy. The point is that when somebody with that ridiculous amount of wealth says, I am humbled and blessed, the implication is they're just one of the normies who got lucky, right? That there isn't something deeply wrong going underneath that's allowing that to take place. And I think Kim Kardashian's a bad example, and I think a lot of people are really frivolous, and I don't know if Kim Kardashian's a bad example. I think generally artists are bad examples, which I would not regard Kim Kardashian as. But like, let's say we're talking about Kanye West. he has a job, he produces things for which he is paid, exorbitantly and disproportionate to the amount of work he puts in, probably, certainly proportionate to the quality of his work, in my opinion, but who cares what I think. I think biting somebody's head off for that is a bit ridiculous, but, like, for example, if, when Jeff Bezos gets off his plane and says thank you to all the people of Amazon for making this possible, like, I don't think, or if he included, like, I'm so humbled, yada yada yada, I don't think that would be envy that would be motivating criticism of that tweet. It would be you're trying to make this seem innocent, like you just got lucky, like, oh, God has blessed me, when in fact what's taking place is extensive exploitation, which is why, while you are enjoying all of these ridiculous luxuries, there are people who can't afford to put food on the table. She's good at pacing. Somehow using frivolity to hide how tedious it is. I don't know. Like, I've never found Contrapoints that interesting, but she's definitely not stupid. I find her videos to be bloated, and I don't care for this kind of theater. But I don't think the attempt is to hide anything with... I don't think the attempt is to hide how tedious it is. I think it's entertainment, ultimately. It's kind of unfortunate that it's... The issue I think people are having, just judging from this setup, is not so much with the fact that it's sort of lowbrow or low medium brow entertainment masquerading as a video essay. It's that it's targeting specific people fairly frivolously and fairly uncharitably. Slap 1.25 speed on there. I will do that. I will gladly do that.
Book as a gift so you can read the motherfucking...
So the response on Twitter resembles moral outrage. But what people were upset about was not that she had the party. I mean...
Oh my god, if I speed it up, she talks like a normal person.
Wouldn't you escape to a private island if you got that MILF money? The problem was more that she tweeted about it, and that the tweet was maybe, just maybe, a little bit yikesy. But if having the party wasn't wrong, then why was tweeting about it wrong? This isn't a good look. We say bad optics, not relatable. Relatability is not a moral category. This is public relations, it's not ethics, and it definitely isn't socialism. Like, I'm pretty sure Karl Marx never said,
the problem with the bourgeoisie is they are not relatable. They can't read the room and it isn't a good look. This should have stayed in the drafts. Hashtag tone deaf.
Isn't the issue that when Kim tweeted this, most people were trapped in quarantine? We didn't get to have birthday parties. Some people couldn't even travel to visit their dying relatives. So watching Kim get to travel and celebrate her birthday like normal was painful.
No, I don't think that's right. I don't think people were upset because the rich person got to enjoy things that they didn't. It was precisely that they got to enjoy things that they said other people shouldn't. It was a case of the wealthy effectively endangering the rest of society for their own gusto, while at the same time poor people are moralized that constantly about not doing that, which isn't, of course, a reason to think that poor people also shouldn't have been taking care not to spread the virus, but it looks like your community is feeding on you rather than for you. So I really don't think this is envy. Like, I would react to that extremely negatively. I hate parties.
Pain at the good fortune of others is how Aristotle defined envy. And I think it's interesting that whenever social media erupts in outrage over luxury music festivals or Kim K's birthday party or Jamila Jamil's privileged pores, no one ever uses the word envy. It's like we're averting our eyes, avoiding confrontation with this dark aspect of our own psychology. So in this...
Yeah, okay, I see why people are mad now. Yeah, so we're not allowed to be angry at people flouting recommendations by health authorities that are intended to preserve lives when we have massive death from a global pandemic. In fact, what's actually happening is we're just jealous that they get to have cool parties and we don't. Like, that's just that simple. There's not like an inherent injustice about the wealthy being allowed to flout health regulations to the detriment of the rest of the world. Like, this video seems more to be a critique of the Cultural Revolutionary. I don't know who it's a critique of, but it's... Like, this is... Like, I'm not an activist by any stretch, and I'm getting offended by this.
In this video, I want to take a long, hard look at envy. What is it? Where does it come from? And seriously, what is Jamila Jamil's skincare routine? Drop it in the...
Why couldn't she just start with talking about envy? Just talk about envy. And, like, localize it to, like, don't put it at a societal level. Like, you're going to psychologize whole classes of people now. Like, poor people, like, if you're a lower income person and you're offended that somebody with a lot of money is more free in their society in ways that you specifically aren't, in an effectively illegal way, solely for the reason that they have more money, even if it is to the endangerment of the rest of the community. You're only allowed to have one psychological response to that. It has to be envy. It can't be that, like, the injustice of it actually offends you. Maybe it's rushing to analyze the video when it's barely beginning. I agree to an extent, but, like, I'm getting a strong sense of where this is going. And the fact that I'm getting a strong sense of where this is going means that she's effectively saying that, right? Maybe she'll salvage it in a little bit, but if something is implied, it's said.
In the comments, bestie. Okay, so what is envy? Pain at the good fortune of others is not a bad start, but there's more to it than that. Envy is a syndrome, a complex of poisonous thoughts and feelings about people who have what we want, but cannot get. It's not simply wanting what another person has. That's greed, which is a much more wholesome sin. Because simply wanting what someone has can inspire us. It can fuel our own ambition.
No, that's also envy.
It can even motivate us to improve ourselves. And sometimes people call that envy, but it's not really envy. It's emulation or admiration.
No, it's envy.
At worst, it's what the Bible calls coveting.
Also called envying.
Covets. Envy is something darker. It's not just wanting what someone has, it's begrudging them what they have.
No, it's also just wanting what they have. It can be both. I don't know where she's getting this from.
You might even hate the person you envy and want them to lose what they have, to be humiliated and destroyed, even if their downfall doesn't benefit you in any way.
Yeah, there's a whole host of things that are attached to that. There's resentment, there's yada yada yada. This is spurious.
Like Satan, who is willing to lose heaven just to spite God, according to the poet John Milton. It's gonna be 90 minutes of MILF jokes, kids, so strap in. So envy is malicious. It's a force of destruction. For an example of the distinction between envy and emulation, think about incels, involuntary celibates, these men who can't get girlfriends and are bitter about it online. It was incels who contributed to our culture the concept of chads, that is, beautiful, wealthy, masculine men. For incels, taking the red pill means buying into an ideology which says that women only want to date chads or else they want to marry beta cucks just to take their beta bucks. Gas keep, gate boss, girl light. So if you're an incel, you can either go to the gym and try to become a chad, that's emulation, the aspiration to attain what another person has. Or, and this is the more popular option, you can take the black pill, which means believing that chadhood is genetically determined at birth. There is no hope.
Because, like, this is so definitionally vacuous. Like, emulation is an aspiration to, what was she said, be what the other person has or have what the other person has. I'm just gonna replay that quickly.
Keep, gate, boss, girl light. So if you're an incel, you can either go to the gym and try to become a chad, that's emulation, the aspiration to attain what another person has.
No, emulation is just the act of embodying what the other person has, right? It's an act of copying. Like, it's not an aspiration, it's not an attitude, it's an activity. It's a thing that you do. Like game emulators, you do what the console does, right? That's what that means. That's all it means. I don't know why she's smarter than this. Why is she packing so much into this?
Or, and this is the more popular option, you can take the black pill, which means believing that childhood is genetically determined at birth, there is no hope, no woman will ever want you, and therefore happiness is impossible, you may as well lie down and rot. This mindset of resentment has inspired so many mass murders, there's an entire Wikipedia timeline dedicated to tracking them. And the essential motivation for this violence is envy. The incels' failed ambition and sense of incurable, predestined inferiority turns venomous. The logic behind the violence is, if I can't get a girlfriend, if I can't get what I want, then no one can. In the words of a murderer,
The day of retribution is my attempt to destroy everything I cannot have.
But most incels aren't murderers. Most of the time, envy is most harmful to the person who envies. The philosopher Max Scheler called it a self-poisoning of the mind. There's a Christian saying that envy is the only sin that gives no pleasure. Because the other sins are fun, right? Greed, gluttony, lust. That's what I call a good time. But envy is misery. Though I wouldn't go so far as to say it gives no pleasure.
Fire Festival is an art installation where mediocre people realize what their lives would be like without rich parents. Yes.
Rich refugee crisis.
We're living in a moment of growing inequality and resentment. Look around you. We've got the guillotine memes, we've got edgy teens.
I mean, resentment, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean envy. Like that lunch that was horrifically handed out to people, like that horror show where it's like 2 slices of bread and processed cheese. Like, why even give them anything at that point? That's what some people have to make a decision to eat sometimes, right? Like, I grew up often having to have nothing but peanut butter on cheap bread for like weeks on end, and as a result, I hated peanut butter as an adult for a long time. Because when I was the oldest of a bunch of kids, and if things were tight, like, you had to make compromises with what you ate. I wasn't like that badly fed, but like there were boring choices made because you could get volume. I'm not envious of people who had better food. I resent the fact that my family had bad food despite my parents working themselves to death, because they were able effectively to be exploited. That's not envy, that is resentment, but you can justly resent something. Resenting something isn't necessarily a wrong if it reflects an actual injustice. Is it so bad that she's using envy to describe a real phenomenon, even if she's misusing the term, as long as she clarifies what she means? Yes, it is, because to call somebody envious is to, if they're not envious, is to slander them. She's being extremely invidious.
Tweeting "Eat the Rich." And none of this is new. The slogan "Eat the Rich" actually originates with the philosopher of the French Revolution, Jean-Jacques Bourre, who supposedly said,
When the people have no more to eat, they will eat the rich.
And fair enough, it's a good source of protein. But take it from me, kids, cannibalism is one of those tricky things. It's hard to do just once. You develop a taste for it. It's like they say at NA meetings. Once you've war, you just want more. Also, who counts as the rich? Am I the rich? I certainly hope so, because I want you to eat me. Stop it. See, this is why I quit academia. If I was a professor, I'd have to behave myself. And I don't want to behave myself. I want to be bad. Do you want to be bad with me? Let's be bad. So, you might think that envy is simply the product of inequality, and that societies that have more inequality have more envy. I used to assume that too, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that might not be true. Envy is a basic part of human nature. It exists in all societies and all economic systems.
Generally, envy is something, I'm just spitballing here, but I think generally envy is something that takes place between groups that are more close to each other. So when there's more proximity between people. So if you tend to be more envious of people in your income bracket because those are people you're competing with. If people who should be your peers, let's say people at your church, have like giant houses and things, and they seem to barely work for it, and you have to like break your back just to afford your tiny little apartment, you're probably going to be envious of them. Now, you might also be justly resentful on the grounds that these people are engaging in exploitative practices to gain that wealth, are not giving out that wealth as would be dictated by the ethical stance they avow by being a part of a church community, say. But that's not the same thing as envy. These two things can coexist side by side. And while the envy may be bad, the resentment isn't necessarily unjust, because it is in itself a reaction to effectively being the victim of a sham, because they're taking part in their community and engaging with it as if they are one of them, trying to extract the benefit of being part of that community while they are actively feeding upon it and spiting it. Right? That's what she says later. It doesn't matter if she says it later. If her whole point is that leftists have tons of envy, then I agree. President Sunday, you are not who she's talking about. She's talking about middle-class kids on social media. I don't know if she's talking about middle-class kids on social media. Is that a fact? There are poor people on social media. PS foreshadowing Contra here. More envy among people with similar wealth. Okay, fair enough. Like, that's an obvious point. I'm not surprised she makes it. But she's spending a lot of time right now basically poisoning the well against anybody who criticizes the frivolity of people in the upper classes, right?
Systems, and it begins anytime two or more people start comparing themselves. Part 2, the desire for mommy's milk. According to Sigmund Freud, or as I call him, Daddy, the first stage of human development is the oral stage, in which the primary concern is oral gratification, which is of course provided by mommy milkies. Am I doing too much? I'll tone it down just a little bit. So look, I get that a lot of people are skeptical about
I'll be right
Freud,
back.
and it's true, he was a bit of a crackpot coke fiend who had some zany ideas, like penis envy. Maybe there's transgender men who experience that, but I don't think it's a basic fact of the female condition. As for castration anxiety, is that a dare? Because I take that personally. I'm giving it very serious consideration, doctor. But I feel like even when Freud is wrong, he's often at least onto something. Like with the Oedipus complex, it's not that you literally desire your mother, right? That would be weird. It's more that you desire an archetype. Mother, right? Mommy. You guys get it. Gen Z TikTok lesbians get it. They're the ones who got me started on this MILF shit. I'm a reverse Socrates. I've been corrupted by the young. My innocent and delicate nature has been defiled. So Freud says that in the first 2 years of life, libido is primarily focused on mommy's milk. And it's also in this stage that envy first emerges. So I was the oldest child in my family, and I was less than 2 years old when my brother was born. So I don't remember this because I was 1 year old, but my family tells me that when my brother was born...
No, that is definitely not it. I despise this whole line of conversation. I have not consumed dairy products since The Boys Season 2. This is absolutely revolting.
I was just insanely jealous. Oh, and I guess now's a good time to discuss the difference between jealousy and envy. Scholars agree that there is a difference, and usually they describe the difference in one of two ways. The first is that jealousy is defensive. It's a kind of protectiveness over what is rightfully yours, whereas envy is offensive. It's resentment over what someone else has that you lack. And the second difference is that envy is between two people, the envier and the envied, whereas jealousy typically involves three people, as in romantic jealousy, where you have the subject, the romantic object, and then the rival. And the subject is jealous of the rival because they're protective of their relationship with the romantic object. And that's also the dynamic of sibling rivalry, just substituting the romantic object for mommy. Of course, in ordinary English, people are always going to say jealousy when they really mean envy, probably because jealousy has less negative connotations. And I think it's pointless to try to fight that. Like, I wouldn't go around correcting people, but just keep in mind that there is a difference.
No, I think it's because envy is almost... Like, it sounds silly to say, but it's almost like a big word in some circles. Like, you just jelly. That's a thing that, you know... Like, and envy is like a... It's almost like high speech at like a low level. You know? Like, you hear about it talked about in like a theological context, but you don't typically say envious in everyday speech unless you're trying to sound posh. Which really sounds stupid, but that's been my experience. What are the books in the back here? We have Nietzsche on the Genealogy of Morals, clearly. We have the Marx Engels reader, something called Intercourse. I'm seeing 2 Cambridge volumes here. They're green, so I have a suspicion that they are these. So I think it's Kant's The Metaphysics of Morals, and I am guessing that other one's going to be the Prolegomena, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's the Critique of Practical Reason. That one's short. And then I can't really tell what's beneath that. There's the Essential... Is that the Essential... somebody? There's Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. And something else I can't quite tell. Anyways, moving on.
So sibling rivalry, is that envy or jealousy? Well, I think it's both, because initially you're defensive of your privileged only child relationship with your parents. But a new baby often gets more attention, at least in your paranoid toddler brain, and you might be envious of that. And in romantic jealousy, you may also envy the rival if she has qualities that you wish you had. You know, young kids are little egotists who are very sensitive to when another child might be getting preferential treatment. One of the favorite phrases of tiny babies is, "It's not fair. It's not fair." Tell me about it, Bambino. And I've got bad news. Life is not getting any more fair than this. According to the Bible, one of the first events in human history is the story of Cain y Abel, los dos hermanos. I don't know why I said it in Spanish. I guess I just thought it would sound cool. Was I wrong? Cain. It just sounds so much better than Cain. Cain and Abel.
She stole that joke from MTV with The Architect.
Cain and Abel. God tells Cain and Abel each to make a sacrifice, and then God prefers Abel's, because God loves meat. Then, in an act of malicious envy toward Abel and spite towards God the Father, Cain kills his younger brother.
I don't actually know what the mythology is around that, but I think it has something to do with the fact, because Cain is then placed at the head of a genealogy of city builders and, like crafters and whatnot. And I think that might have to do with the fact that those things are predicated on sedentary living. So the Old Testament, not the Old Testament, Genesis seems to be filled with sort of implicit polemics against neighboring peoples. Like when you look at the creation account, you have like a sequence of different things that are put below, like they are disenchanted, to use sort of Iberian language. You have the neighboring gods like Dagon and whatnot, like represented by fish. Well, the fish are just things that are just springing out of the earth. There's nothing about them, and they're put under man, effectively like putting underfoot the gods of all of your rivals. But yeah, anyways, moving on, I guess.
In my earliest memories of my brother, I already loved him, and I don't remember the envy, so I guess I wasn't a Cain. So I must have somehow worked through this without resorting to murder. Freud says that the older sibling's envy of the younger leads to a recognition of impotence, because at first, you selfishly want to be the special, most loved child, but you see that your parents love your sibling just as much as you, and you're powerless to do anything about it, so your ambition to superiority fails. And so you have no choice but to repress your ambition to superiority as well as your envy. And the result of that repression is what we could call herd instinct, solidarity, this feeling of identifying with a group, the equal siblings. And as you get older, the herd instinct evolves into feelings about justice, duty, community, and equality. But Freud thought these feelings retain a vestige of repressed envy. If I can't be the favorite, if I can't have special privileges, then no one can. And from these observations, Freud made the generalization:
social justice means that we deny ourselves many things so that others may have to do without them as well.
Okay, so we don't want other people to have anything we can't have, so we enviously insist on equality as a defense against the greater prosperity of others. Now, I don't think I completely agree with that. I think Freud is definitely onto something here, but don't some of our community feelings also come from a place of genuine care for other people? I cared for someone once. Rosebud. Well, we'll come back to that later. Let's put a pin in me for now. A pin in it for now. In Freud, I mean. Let's put a pin in Freud. In a 1966 book titled Envy, A Theory of Social Behavior, the sociologist Helmut Schuck argued that rather than being...
Okay, so... this is just weird and hard to follow. I think the main thing, thus far, 18 minutes in, the main thing people are objecting to is that she's switching from a description of people's reaction against frivolous spending by wealthy people in an unjust society, and then going into a deep analysis of envy with the unstated implication that this is the motive factor in all of these cases. And the problem, again, is that even if she salvages this is an hour and 50 minutes long almost. That's the takeaway people are going to have in both directions. So not just people who are offended by it, but people who are like, yeah, they're just envious, right? We can think of this as multiple different videos, because most people are not going to watch this in one sitting. So this is actually doing damage to the efforts of, well, not just the efforts, but just it's slandering the critique of excessive wealth and the abuse of excessive wealth, and inequality not predicated on the abilities conferred by wealth itself, but by the willingness of institutions to turn a blind eye to antisocial behaviors by people on the grounds they are wealthy. Right? Like, I think there are reasons to be pissed off about this.
That is a very German name. Helmut Schuck? It's putting me in a German mood, sweetie. Hallo, meine Lieben. Heute gibt's ein neues Video. I just get worse at German every year. Schuck art.
And 90% of this is bloat. Like, she'll mention a German name and then she'll spend like 2 minutes talking about, like, making fun of the sound of a German name. Like, this is such an exhausting waste of time. Like, it's mildly funny sometimes, but it's not that funny, and the humor doesn't really. It doesn't point to like an actual irony or something that's actually funny about the world. It's just kind of self-indulgent, which I'm not resentful of, except that again, like, the whole thing starts to get the. You start to get the sense that she's mocking the people that she was implying are motivated by envy. She has explicitly equated any sense of a need for fairness with envy, which is a slander. I don't think she explicitly equivocated between the two, but she definitely, like, it's a bit weaselly, isn't it? That's definitely something you could take away from this very easily. She doesn't not do that.
Argued that rather than being the result of social or economic inequality, envy is a universal across all human societies.
I disagree with you, fellow traveler. Like, I'm sorry, just some of her jokes are funny. The last sequence was not funny. I was just revolted by it, but she is funny sometimes.
Including very egalitarian ones. For example, in tribal and village cultures around the world, there's often a concept of black magic or witchcraft, which are thought to be used by envious people to bewitch the ones they envy. You're probably familiar with the concept of the evil eye, which originates in ancient Greece, or maybe even earlier than that. Cultures all over the world today understand the evil eye as a kind of curse cast by the malignant gaze of an envious person. Now, you might be thinking that sounds superstitious, but I actually think the concept of the evil eye reveals a more sophisticated awareness of envy and of the social danger that it poses. You've probably seen these amulets around. There's an emoji for them now, which are supposed to protect against the evil eye. It's called a nazar, which comes from the Arabic word for sight or surveillance, similar to the origin of the English word envy, which is the Latin invidia, which just means to look at. So there's an agreement across cultures that envy is related to sight, the malevolent gaze, the evil eye. And these amulets show that a lot of people are afraid of being envied and want to protect themselves. I was just watching this Turkish YouTube channel with an episode on the evil eye, and the host explains that for Muslims,
it's customary to say, MashaAllah, or God has willed it when admiring a person or object, to avoid unintentionally cursing them.
I love that. It's like no envy, like no homo, but no envy. MashaAllah. The top comment on that video says,
you want to protect yourself from the evil green eye monster? Well, don't tell others about your ideas, goals, or wishes. Don't be flaunting your accomplishments on social media or posting pictures of your children. That's how you avoid being jinxed.
See, this is where Kim Kardashian went wrong with her birthday post. Clearly, no one in the Kardashian cinematic universe has ever heard of the evil eye. Wait, I thought these people were Armenians. Why haven't they heard of the evil— Oh. Okay, never mind. Every piece of media they've ever produced is about flaunting an enviable lifestyle. This is a particularly American thing. Most Americans have no concept of the fear of envy. Like, there's advertisements here that literally promise, if you buy this exclusive luxury vibrator, you'll be the envy of all your friends. As if it's a good thing to be envied. Oh, but it is not. If people envy you, they gossip about you, right? They seethe over your successes and celebrate your misfortunes. Being envied is basically the opposite of being loved. So why would anyone want to be envied? Well, it's a contradiction of human nature. On the one hand, we need to be loved, but then there's this other drive in us, this like Homeric striving for fame and glory and riches, which is kind of in conflict with our need to be loved. In a past Gilded Age, there were stories like Citizen Kane and Sunset Boulevard, which warned what a sad and lonely thing success can become. In ancient democratic Athens, there was a practice called ostrakismos, which is the origin of the English word ostracism. Ostracism was a procedure where the Athenians would assemble and each person would write the name of a person they wanted to ostracize on a pottery shard called an ostrakon. And whoever got the most votes would simply be banished from the city for 10 years. No questions asked. I love the ancient world. Things were so direct. Often this was used to remove someone who was becoming too prominent or too arrogant or just annoying, according to Plutarch.
Or who lost an election by a slim margin.
I'm just gonna read this from Wikipedia. And one anecdote about Aristides, known as Aristides the Just, who was ostracized in 482, an illiterate citizen not recognizing him came up to ask him to write the name Aristides on his ostracon. When Aristides asked why, the man replied, it was because he was sick of hearing him being called the Just. It's good! It's so good! See, this is why the idea of cancel culture is absurd. This has been going on since the dawn of civilization. People in most cultures, not all, but most cultures understand that being envied is a massive social liability, so it's best not to draw too much attention to yourself. According to a Tamil saying, the tree that bears fruit will be stoned. This is sometimes called—
I'm pretty sure cancel culture is generally referring to it's generally referring to a tendency, not a policy of removing rabble rousers. It's referring to a tendency to obstruct people from, broadcasting what are perceived to be toxic messages efficiently. That's not the same thing. But we're 22 minutes in. She hasn't even gotten to the damn point yet. This is so slow. Like, stop with the jokes. They aren't good. They aren't good. There's too many. Like, pepper them in. Pepper them in, like a few, but not every other sentence.
Called tall poppy syndrome, because the tallest poppies in the garden will be cut. Shook argues that the fear of envy is a major inhibiting force in many societies.
In Haiti, G.E. Simpson found that a peasant will seek to disguise his true economic position by purchasing several smaller fields, rather than one larger piece of land. For the same reason, he will not wear good clothes. He does this intentionally to protect himself against the envious black magic of his neighbors.
Now, this kind of thing is not unheard of in America. Like, I've known people from seriously wealthy families who move to the city and they dress like gutter punks, like they're trying to pass as poor. But in general, Americans don't openly acknowledge fear of envy in the way many other cultures do, and I don't think that's an accident. We're a nation of show-offs, and so the taboo against discussing envy is related to our whole national ethos of shoving our wealth in everyone's face.
No, I think it has to do with the fact that the wealthy are actually geographically distanced from the poor, generally speaking. The houses of the rich don't exist near the houses of the poor, and they're typically gated, which means that they don't have anything to fear from the poor because the poor don't have access to their stuff, right? You are motivated to look poor in the presence of your poorer neighbors to, like, well, actually, it's the reason, oddly enough, it's the reason Thucydides gives for Athens' prosperity despite the relative aridness of its climate. It was undesirable soil, and so it was able to flourish as a hub because it was on the coast, because nobody wanted to conquer it for the most part. There wasn't any value in it. Its value was the value of Athens extrinsically was the function it performed, not the land itself.
But though the fear of envy isn't widely talked about or admitted here, it's definitely still there, only repressed, confined to the realm of dreams and art. In the movie Black Swan, Nina is a perfection-obsessed ballerina who achieves her dream of getting the lead role in Swan Lake, after which her life and mind are totally unraveled by fear of envy. Black magic, Black Swan. At first we see how Nina's success comes at the very real cost of being envied. By her ex-ballerina mother, by the other girls in the company, and by the former lead ballerina she's replaced.
Did you suck his Not all of us have to.
I love Winona Ryder so much. I love Natalie Portman so much. I love Mila Kunis so much. I just like women. Where's my shock wand? Stop it. Stop standing. But reasonable fear of envy becomes paranoia as Nina begins hallucinating Black Swan doppelgangers and is seduced by bisexual demon Mila Kunis, who's trying to steal her role. You gotta watch out for those bisexual demons. They'll getcha.
Did you have some sort of Leslie wet dream about me?
I want to make this at 1.5, but if I do, I'm afraid I won't be able to understand what she's saying.
You could argue that Nina is actually suffering a kind of self-envy.
Okay, let's try and speed it up a little bit and let's see what happens. If it's unwatchable, then I'll set it back down low.
She envies the disinhibited, sexually liberated, corrupted part of herself that's capable of adult eroticism, and also of dancing the Black Swan. So she imagines that part of herself as an envious rival who's trying to replace her. It's like her mind is split between two impulses. There's her dominant White Swan impulse, which we could call the Squidward personality, perfectionistic and orderly, but reserved, priggish, stiff. And then there's her repressed Black Swan impulse, which we could call the SpongeBob personality, intuitive, chaotic, ecstatic. In SpongeBob SquarePants, the character Squidward is fundamentally a figure of envy, stemming from failed ambition.
Hello, you've reached the house of unrecognized talent.
Squidward aspires to artistic achievement, but remains a mediocrity, partly because of his overly dry, doctrinaire attitude towards art. SpongeBob is Squidward's social equal. They're literally neighbors, and they both work the same fast food service job for the same exploitative capitalist. But SpongeBob is a Mozartian intuitive genius.
I think it's sort of implied that Squidward is a failure because he actually just sucks. It's not an attitude problem, it's that he's actually not a good artist. I don't know.
Who's able to transform the most mundane activities, blowing bubbles, flipping burgers, into a kind of aesthetic rapture. Squidward intensely envies SpongeBob's uninhibited joy and intuitive creativity.
No, I think Squidward's generally just in awe of the fact that an idiot like SpongeBob can do things amazingly sometimes. I may be misrecalling the episode, and this isn't that important, but I feel like this is besmirching the honor of the character of Squidward. I think he's just he misjudges his own talent and is annoyed by his neighbor's noise, and that's about it.
But he can't admit that envy to himself, so he convinces himself that what he's really feeling is contempt, snobbish disdain for SpongeBob's childish behavior.
What the people want is culture, not dancing bubbles.
Though deep down, Squidward really wants what SpongeBob has.
It's beautiful.
No, Squidward does not want what SpongeBob has. Squidward wants what Squilliam has. Squilliam has wealth and fame and the goods of his particular art, right? And he is a peer to Squidward. They come from the same place. He resents his job because it actually is ill-suited to his character. At least what he thinks his character is. I don't think his character is generally motivated by envy. I think his character is just bored and depressed because he's forced into a demeaning position when he wants to engage in... He wants to be doing an activity that has some sort of significance or value, not just being a cog in the metabolism of the poor, effectively, selling them bad food.
Which we see when he can't help himself from blowing bubbles, or when he trades away all of his possessions for the chewing gum wrapper that in SpongeBob's hands was a source of infinite entertainment. A lot of people my age who watched SpongeBob as a kid rewatch it now and are horrified to discover that they identify with Squidward, whereas as children they identified with SpongeBob. Well, you either die a SpongeBob or you live long enough to see yourself become the Squidward. And there's a pain in becoming Squidward, which is usually explained as the disappointing drudgery of adult life, or simply loss of childhood. I would argue that envy of childhood is the distinctive Squidwardian emotion. Squidwardian? Are we saying that word? Are we really saying that word out loud?
No, I think people identify with Squidward because, through no fault of their own, they're deprived of, again, nutrition, access to education, access to leisure to excel at education, and equipment such that they can do what Squilliam does. And like one thing again that Squidward has to put up with that Squilliam doesn't is while Squidward is practicing his clarinet, he is doing so tired after a long day at a dead-end job under a deadbeat boss. Right? That adds to her point that we envy people who are similar to us. I'm not disagreeing with that point. I think we specifically envy people who are similar to us. However, the examples she puts at the beginning are not people who are similar to us. Kim Kardashian is not similar to us in anything like a material sense at all. Her existence is alien. I think what people, again, to even introduce envy at all, when we're talking about not just a party, we're talking about a party that was flouting COVID regulations during a pandemic that has killed now millions of people. That's invidious. That is a slanderous thing to do. And even if she corrects it later on, we are now half an hour in. The damage is done.
To an audience of millions? Okay. It's basically the same dynamic as Salieri's envy of Mozart and Amadeus. Oh my god, the evil eye killed Mozart. You gotta watch out for that one, kids. If a mysterious stranger shows up on your doorstep at midnight asking you to compose a requiem mass for your own father, just say no. So in SpongeMadeus Mozart Pants, we have a diligent though stuffy wannabe envying the effortless playfulness of the spontaneous genius.
Grazie, signore.
So Squidward's envy of SpongeBob is, well, it's Apollo's envy of Dionysus. Look, if we were to view SpongeBob SquarePants through the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, stay with me ladies, I have an angle here, we could say that Squidward represents what Nietzsche called the Apollonian impulse, while SpongeBob represents the Dionysian. Nietzsche thought there were two conflicting artistic drives in the human personality. The Apollonian, named after the Greek god Apollo, is the drive towards self-control, order, logic, morality, and the Dionysian, named after Dionysus, is the drive toward intoxication, frenzy, passion, intuition. Both SpongeBob and Amadeus present these two drives in conflict, with the Apollonian envying the Dionysian. Of course, this is a misrepresentation of how art is actually created, because Nietzsche's whole point is that you need a balance of the two drives.
Thank you, JS. That's very kind of you.
In reality, you cannot have a pure Dionysian artist like SpongeBob, because creating good art requires at least some level of discipline and ordering.
See, it is all in the technique.
Otherwise, you're just some drunk idiot with a guitar. Get off the stage! So Black Swan is, in a way, actually more realistic. In order to give the perfect performance, Nina has to unify her fragmented personality and dance both swans, resolving the envious rivalry between her two artistic impulses.
That was perfect.
Another movie about fear of envious ballerina doppelgangers can you guess it? Is Jordan Peele's 2019 horror film Us, which dramatizes...
She's missing out on such a wonderful opportunity to discuss The Lighthouse, and it offends me. That is such a perfect... Actually, I'm gonna... Does she talk about The Lighthouse? Oh, that uncultured swine.
Is the repressed economic guilt and fear of the American middle class. We meet the Wilsons, a moderately affluent family with a vacation house and a boat, along with the Tylers, a slightly better off white family, whom the Wilsons envy.
You saw their new car, right? You have to do it. You just have to get that thing to fuck with me, too.
One night, the Wilsons' vacation home is invaded by a family of their own monstrous doppelgangers. Red, the only doppelganger who can speak, explains that her family is metaphysically tethered to the Wilsons, living wretched and destitute versions of their lives in a liminal backrooms underworld. It's super fucking liminal. I'm on Ambien at an AA meeting. Not again.
Once upon a time, there was a girl, and the girl had a shadow. The two were connected, tethered together. When the girl ate, her food was given to her warm and tasty. But when the shadow was hungry, she had to eat rabbit, raw and bloody.
We later find out that all over the US, US spells us. Hey, that's the title of the movie. Oh. The tethered have risen up to kill their privileged doppelgangers and to link arms across the country in a dark parody of the Real World 1986 homelessness fundraiser Hands Across America. So my reading of Us is that it's an expression of middle-class guilt about privilege and fear of envy. It's not a movie about the working class. If it was a movie about the working class, then the working class would be able to speak human languages and would not be scary monsters who make animal sounds and stagger around like zombies. This is a movie about the anxious middle class's nightmare of the working class. Us represents in a self-aware way what other home invasion movies represent.
Not just the middle class's nightmare of the working class. If you are somebody with any sort of artistic or intellectual ambition and you are stuck in the working class, it feels just like that to you. That's the Squidward character. You're surrounded by people who have no love or appreciation of the stuff that gives your life meaning, and you suffer for it because you're still stuck dredging in the same activities they are, despite the fact that you are not suited to it. Maybe you actually are suited to it and you don't realize it, but that's beside the point. This is not just a middle class thing.
Present unconsciously the fear of the envious poor, of revolution, of slave revolt.
Tell me you did not just reference Home Alone.
But Us diverges from other home invasion movies by not just being fearful about the underclass, but also guilty. The idea of the tethered underclass represents life as a zero-sum game where every moment of your happiness is bought with someone else's suffering. It's an incredibly guilty fantasy, an internalization of the black magic logic of people who blame their own misfortunes on the people they envy. As Shook puts it, my neighbor's harvest can only have turned out better than mine, because he has somehow succeeded in reducing mine by black magic. So the fear of envy and the guilt of success are repressed in American culture, but they still find expression in movies. Jordan Peele is kind of like the Charles Dickens of the 21st century. Us actually reminds me of A Christmas Carol, a story about the guilt of the rich if ever there was one. You know, Scrooge is visited by ghosts who show him how wretched and sad the lives of his employees are, and how he'll die alone and hated by everyone, and his funeral is only attended by businessmen on the condition that lunch is provided. Dickens was truly the master of scaring the rich straight. So maybe fear of envy can serve a softly regulatory function by motivating charity and generosity in the rich. But in general, I'm suspicious of envy as a motivation for politics. Because remember, the basic logic of envy is, if I can't have it, then no one can, which is a purely negative, destructive style of thinking. It's taking privileges away, not for the material benefit of the underprivileged, but merely for the psychological satisfaction of the envious person.
See? She's saying this sentence, but not clarifying that actually there are legitimate reasons to be resentful of certain excesses of wealth and the exploitation that is the means by which it was acquired. She's not just talking about other people have nicer houses, and that's it, right? It goes far deeper than that. We're talking about a situation in which there are people with more wealth than countries have, more power than entire demographics have politically in their capacity to project a message. Things like that, in their ability to materially impose to impose material pressures on how people vote and how people, enact their political freedom in all classes. While there are people lower down who can't even eat or have to make a decision between clothing themselves or fueling their vehicle. We're not just talking about a situation where people are, again, feeling bitter because somebody else has a nicer television. We're talking about a situation of active exploitation resulting in gradations of extreme deprivation. Yeah, The Lighthouse is a great movie. I think I've watched it like 30 times by now. I'll have to do a stream on it at some point. I think me and Jalma were supposed to do one. When he gets back, we'll probably chat about that. And a Dark Academia one too. I'm looking forward to that one.
And that's even worse when you consider that envy is subjective. It doesn't necessarily target objective power and privilege. So envy in politics is not by any means relegated to the left. Conservative politics is brimming with envy. Like in this debate about forgiving student loan debt, you often hear people say, I had to pay my student loans, so they should too. Debt forgiveness is not fair. The logic here is, since I didn't get my student debt forgiven, no one should.
No, the logic is, since I didn't get my student debt forgiven, I am justified in denying student debt to other people. It's not envy, it's contempt. There's a difference. People who pay off their student debt early and don't take it seriously and don't feel the weight of that, these are people who are privileged enough to not feel the sting of that debt. Now that's relative, mind you. They still had to take on a loan, but I don't know anybody who has actually struggled to pay for school, who thinks that that's a valid argument.
It's intergenerational envy, which is a pretty common thing. Usually older generations envying the young. Kids these days have it so easy. When I was young, we ate nails for breakfast and sent texts and...
Sorry, this is the point I wanted to make. And crucially, the capacity to pay off your student loan debt is dependent upon what field you go into. And there is a culture of absolute contempt for the liberal arts and for the humanities and for social sciences and things like that. Whereas, at least until recently, if you went into STEM, you were pretty much guaranteed, if you performed, to have an income that could actually pay off your debt and give you a reasonable standard of living after the fact. But, I mean, that's kind of awful. Do you want to live in a place that disincentivizes people from becoming artists and historians and scholars? It's stacking the deck so that either we are all stupid or only the rich are allowed to engage in anything like thoughtful and reflective vocation.
Messages on the Pony Express. The feeling is basically, it's not fair. Kids these days don't have to suffer like I suffered. Or think about the concept of a welfare queen, which openly reeks of envy and white resentment. Or the way conservatives talk about immigration. It's all this envious suspicion about illegal immigrants sneaking in and getting government handouts without having to pay taxes. I had to work hard for my money, so I should...
I don't think it's envy, I think it's hatred. I think they actually are just disgusted by them. I think they look at the dress and the eating habits and the housing and the filthy state of lower income cities, and they are just contemptful of them. I think that's really what it is. And you can pepper in a bit of other things too, like racial prejudice and whatnot. There's a whole host of things. I don't think it's envy. I don't think conservatives are envious of lower class people they regard as freeloaders. I think they hate them.
These people get a free ride. Not that that's what being an illegal immigrant is actually like, except in the imagination of people who envy them. Envy is felt more intensely by prideful people, so it's especially sharp when it targets people who are supposed to be beneath you. The Jewish radical feminist Andrea Dworkin made what I think is a pretty compelling argument that both anti-Semitism and misogyny are partly rooted in envy. She quotes a bigoted argument made by the wife-killing protagonist of Tolstoy's story, The Kreutzer Sonata, who resents that women and Jews find a kind of paradoxical power in their own oppression.
Just like the Jews, as they pay us us back for their oppression by financial domination. So it is with women. Ah, you want us to be traders only? All right. As traders we will dominate you, say the Jews. Ah, you want us to be merely objects of sensuality? All right. As objects of sensuality we will enslave you.
Dworkin explains.
This dominance of men by women is experienced by the men as real, emotionally real, sexually real, psychologically real. It emerges as the reason.
Yeah, JS, you can't do philosophy, history, etc. as a hobby if you want to do it well. It's an extraordinarily time-consuming activity.
For the wrath of the misogynist, the woman appears to control sex. The man needs it. This causes his rage at her perceived power over him.
Women control access to what men want, which gives women a kind of indirect power that some men envy. They envy the sexual power of women. It doesn't matter to the misogynist that, especially at the time Tolstoy was writing, women objectively have less power in society than men. He envies women because they have what he desires. Likewise, it didn't matter to Weimar anti-Semites that Jewish people were a marginalized minority. Anti-Semitism is often rooted in an envious obsession with the disproportionate influence and affluence of Jewish people.
It is not the absolute differences between men which feed envy, but subjective perception, the optics of envy.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who's the cuntest of them all?
You know, I don't know that it's more exasperated disregard, JS. Like, I think of the attitude towards people who open fire on protests, like the BLM protests, or like that case with that character Zoltanus, who was part of the National Guard, who was I don't remember exactly what happened, but he had been tweeting on Telegram or something that he was looking forward to them giving them live ammo to open fire on the crowd. I don't think they're just exasperated with these people. I think they actually do hate them. I think they see them as rats. It's equating sense of unfairness with enviousness when they're just not the same emotion, or at least the latter is a very uncharitable interpretation of the former. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even sure it's just a sense of unfairness. Like, you can be indifferent emotionally to it and still recognize that there are bad elements to this. Like, for one, it represents extraordinary wastefulness and a demoralizing factor when you have, again, you're asking the masses of the middle to lower income citizens of a country to deprive themselves for the sake of the collective of a whole host of luxuries and goods, like in the case of the pandemic. Meanwhile, you have rich people flaunting the fact that they are flaunting those very regulations for purely selfish reasons, to the risk of the whole. You may not feel anything towards that. You may be emotionally indifferent to the persons who were engaging in that. You may not feel any resentment whatsoever and still recognize that that is a very bad thing.
Thou art cunt, my queen, but hold, a lovely maid I see.
Oh yes, it's me.
What? In a way, I'm kind of just in the beginning of this whole transition, you know, like a young little girl going through all these things, having a sleepover with the girls. What do we do on a sleepover? Do we have like pillow fights and all that stuff?
Alas, she is more cunt than thee.
My pussy something on the gram has come to nothing. The classic 1937 Disney movie, Snow White and the Wicked MILF, is the story of a, quote, vain and wicked queen who obsessively envies the beauty of her own stepdaughter. Are you sure this was for children? Every day the MILF queen asks the mirror who is the fairest one of all, and the mirror responds that the queen is the fairest, till one day it says the stepdaughter Snow White is the fairest, which sends the queen into an envious fury, resulting in a series of bizarre murder attempts. So first of all...
Thank you for the... I don't actually know what currency that is, JS, but thank you very much. Strong disagree, but thank you for the anecdotes. I take it you disagree with the contempt versus hatred point? I mean, coming from a conservative background myself, I can sort of see how that's, like, not obvious, because you don't actively feel just seething hatred all the time. I see hatred between classes as being something more like a Hobbesian state of war, where it's not so much that there is an active conflict going on, so much as you have an attitude or a disposition towards a group of people, such that there is always an avenue for... How do I want to put this? There is an opening for you to engage in destructive annihilatory violence against them always open to you, because you do not regard them as of you, and you regard them as against you, if that makes sense. I think in that respect, I think it's fair to characterize it as hatred. Maybe not like frothing at the mouth, insane hatred. Not to say that I think it's sane, but I don't think it's mere exasperation. I don't think it's like exasperation makes it sound like it's the frustration of a parent dealing with a wayward child. What it actually is hostility towards a group of people who are deprived in a way that you are not, or at least you don't see yourself as being. And I disagree with the idea that conservatives are filled with envy of the lower classes. I think it is. I mean, I think you would agree that it's not envy of the lower classes as well, because they don't direct that envy upwards. In fact, they valorize the wealth of people who are extraordinarily more rich than they are. So, yeah. Sorry, I'm in an argumentative kind of mood. I'll move along now. You're so interesting as leftist. I'm finding your comments valuable, JS. I mean, not just because you're attaching money to them, of course, but I'm not offended by this. It's actually good to have a conservative in the audience, so you can kind of bounce this off of.
Can we talk plot holes, dang? Are we really supposed to believe that this is more beautiful than this? Dang. Isn't Snow White like 12 years old? What's going on, Walt? Why don't you take a seat? Maybe she's not 12, I don't know. It's hard to tell because she's constantly surrounded by manlets. But she's just so boring. And the queen is such a baddie. Step on my throat, mother. This is a horny video. Well, yeah, because I quit riding that brown tiger. I can feel the pulse back in my veins. So despite the injustice done to its lead MILF, Snow White does illustrate some interesting things about envy. Once again, we have black magic and witchcraft as an expression of envy. We have the age difference, intergenerational envy, the envy of youth. It kind of reminds me of those millennial women who hit 30 and suddenly feel a need to rage against Gen Z. Pretty counterproductive, since if you're worried about seeming old, complaining about the youths is probably not helping your case, Gorge. You might wonder if there's also jealousy involved with the evil queen. Like, is she worried that the king is gonna fall in love with his own daughter? Well, I don't think so, because we never even see the king. The queen doesn't mention him. It's not about the king, so there's no romantic jealousy involved. It's just one woman envying another woman over beauty for its own sake. We stand a Bechdel test passing. Movie about women hating each other. Gatekeep, gas girl, gate girl, gas keep, light boss. In fact, in the original Brothers Grimm version, the queen first tries killing Snow White with beauty accessories, poisoning a comb, and lacing her to death with a corset. I wish I could die that way. What's really striking is the pure kamikaze malignity of it all. This queen, who we know is obsessed with her look, is willing to transform herself with witchcraft into an ugly old hag, just to give Snow White the poisoned apple. And the queen disguising herself as an old hag parallels Satan disguising himself as a serpent. I mean, you could actually argue that the queen is simply a persona of Satan. It's Paradise Lost all over again, which also happens to be the title of my memoir. The queen is incredibly petty, because even according to the, again, wrong and tasteless mirror, she's still the second most beautiful woman in the world. How could someone so close to the top of the hierarchy still be consumed by envy? Well, basically, because that's how envy works. It's petty, it's subjective, and it's indifferent to the magnitude of the inequality.
I feel like we're circling the drain here. We've been going through movies just like, what is envy? What is it? Like, get to the point. Is there a spot I can skip to? Like, we're 41 minutes in. We haven't developed.
Or to the absolute position on the overall hierarchy, so you can be the second best in the world and still be obsessively envious of the one person who may barely even be above you.
Like, why are we talking about Snow White? These aren't real people. All we've determined is that Snow White is a shallow movie. Like, it's like the envy exists solely to motivate the queen to do bad stuff. Paul A, an hour and 26 minutes? Do you mean I should jump to an hour and 26 minutes? Like something happens there? So if I jump there, am I going to be accused of not watching the whole video and not being adequately charitable? Let's get a vote. Should I skip to an hour and 26 minutes and get to the good stuff, or should I endure another 45 minutes of this nonsense? I'm not doing that. I'm not going through 45 minutes of this. Like, this is just an excuse to put her into costumes. And like, they're nice sets and everything, but god damn, maybe break this up into episodes or something. No skip? Guys, I'm only at 41 minutes in. It's 45 minutes till we get to the part. Skip, yes? Okay, we're going to start from scratch. I'm going to count the next 10 votes. Yes or no? Alright, we're skipping ahead. I'm sorry to everybody who doesn't want me to skip ahead. I have to do it. We'll be here all night. I'm on my second dose of COVID. I am dying right now. We're going to 126. Okay. If there's some hidden gem of wisdom in the middle here that I'm skipping over, maybe we'll do another stream and we'll go over that sometime, but... Oh, my eye is killing me. Alright, let's go. This is also my third stream of the day. I am not used to this.
Opposite of music, because a lot of music, like blues, is benevolent moaning that transforms pain into pleasure. I mean, that's what blues is all about. My woman don't love me no more, but I know her sister will. You know? Optimism. I think a lot of incel discourse is really just malignant moaning, right? It's not an attempt to diagnose or solve any problem. It's just a contagious expression of misery.
Whoa.
A moan of...
Whoa, that's interesting. Did you see the, look at the, look at the captions here.
But I know her sister will, you know? Optimism. I think a lot of incel discourse is really just malignant moaning.
We just skipped over it. Can I go back like a second? Yeah, she says it's just malignant moaning, but the captions say it's Dostoevskian moaning. So there's a second video hidden here. I haven't been paying attention to the subtitles, but there are multiple videos in this video of an hour and 48 minutes long.
Just malignant moaning, right? It's not an attempt to diagnose or solve any problem. It's just a contagious expression of misery. A moan of pain that masquerades as a political agenda. Sexual Marxism, they call it. The redistribution of sex. State-mandated GFs. That's very valid. Of course, they don't actually expect any of this to happen. That's not the point. So incels are kind of a universal punching bag online. It's very easy to point and laugh at them. But what's harder is to look in the mirror and notice how these exact same tendencies are rampant in our own communities. So the incel black pill is just one instance of what I call an ideology of resentment. A discourse that outwardly appears like moral or political critique, but which on examination is mainly just a resentful moan. The goal of resentment politics is not to improve conditions. In fact, the resentful person is full of contempt for any morally compromised sellouts who are attempting to enact plausible reforms. They don't want victory. They don't want power. They want to endlessly critique power.
Okay, so what this amounts to then is when people argue that effectively liberal reformist attitudes that treat the actual solving of institutional problems as impossible and thereby fulfill their own prophecy by making it impossible. Like you look, for example, at people who try to shame Bernie or Busters into voting for Biden. I'm ambivalent on that, but that's just an example. She's trying to frame these people as not being concerned with actual practical issues and simply being resentful. That's what this boils down to. And I really dislike that. I dislike it for a couple of reasons. One, because that attitude... I mean, it's sort of arbitrarily stopped there. What do I want to say to that? I don't think you should be pathologizing a radical critique of your community that doesn't simply accept that we just have to keep playing the same game we've been playing all along. I think that's spurious, and I think it's frankly abusive to people who are pointing out real problems, right? Like it's not a solution to problems to elide them on the bare assertion that, and it is the bare assertion that solving them is impossible. She hasn't identified quote unquote these people yet, though. She's just saying this attitude exists to some degree. Yeah, but we all know who she's talking about, right? Like, she seems to be very into reformist territory here. That was what I most disliked about it. I don't think the issue is that she's reformist. I think the issue is that she's invidious against people who aren't reformist. That's the problem. I don't think if she made a video arguing for why reformism was the only reasonable way forward, I don't think people would take as much of an issue with it. They'd take an issue with it, but I don't think they'd take as much of an issue with it as this, where she's saying reformism is the only way forward, and by the way, the only people who disagree are just envious of the rich, right? I think that's what people are offended by, and I would have to be charitable to the point of being unreasonable to not be taking that away at this point.
Because for them, critique is an important psychological defense against feeling impotent. Shaler described it this way.
It is peculiar to ressentiment criticism that it does not seriously desire that its demands be fulfilled. It does not want to cure the evil. The evil is merely a pretext for the criticism.
What am I going to do with my eyes? I think a pink kind of look. We've been doing a lot of pink looks. I love that hay fever look. As a general rule, the more radical a political community claims to be, the more likely it is to be a community of resentment. Self-styled radicals will tell you, superficial surface reforms do not interest us. The problem must be critiqued at its root. And then the root turns out to be this universal, all-encompassing evil, right? Society itself, the system, the machine. A resentment ideologue always imagines himself to be engaged in a kind of satanic revolt against an omnipotent...
Okay. I resent this one. So I remember back when I was working in Walmart during my undergraduate, I've told this story before, we would have ethics meetings in the morning. We would have a Walmart manager get up in front of us. We'd do the awful little cheer that I never participated in. In fact, I would whisper under my breath, "Hail Target," at the end of it. But what would happen is they would, give us a lecture on don't steal time. Stealing time is when you clock out slightly late and clock back in slightly early to get a few more pennies on the hour, kind of thing. Or some people were fired because they would swipe twice. It's like, oh, I just made a mistake. I didn't realize I was still getting paid for lunch because I swiped it twice. Stuff like that. You don't want to be unethical. Meanwhile, we are surrounded by boxes. Boxes of clothes made in sweatshops marked "Made in Bangladesh." And I remember I was reading the newspaper that morning before my shift started, and it was going on about, there was an article about how a Bangladeshi factory owned by Walmart had a fire, and everybody, or a large number of people inside, died because the overseers had left and locked the door behind them so that they couldn't leave. They had to just do their work inside the building. That's not something that is fixed by reform. That is a systemic evil that extends beyond the purview of one state. She was making an argument similar to the one made by Nick Land to people like me. Concepts sans practices navel gazing. In Land's case, exit, leave for another arena. Natalie's recommendation unclear. If it is indeed the case that all of our wealth is extracted in a very unjust fashion, then I think a radical critique of our social structures is warranted. Now, that doesn't actually mean that it's plausible to undo them in sort of an immediate way, just with like a few explosions and rallies and things like that. But that's a practical question. You don't get away from the real ethical issue just by pointing out that it's difficult to fix, or even by pointing out that everybody who has critiqued it so far has not had the means to fix it. Right? And the perverse thing about this is that it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what you need in order to affect that change at that level, and we have historically affected change at that level, there is a reason, for example, why we no longer are allowed to keep slaves in the obvious way. But if you tell everybody that the only thing they can do is reform, then obviously people are only going to vote for reformist policies, which means that only reformist policies are voted for, which means that, well, that declaration that only reformist policies are viable is precisely what makes it so. Or at the very least, that is not eliminated as a factor that would make it so, even if without that it would be possible. We just don't know. She goes on to use China as an example of a country that committed mass murders because of envy. Yeah, that's silly. I mean, there was murder because of envy, no doubt. when you like with the there are lots of reports of people during the Cultural Revolution, not so much envy, but I think more resentment, punishing people who inflicted petty wrongs on them in their locality because they were given a blank slate to do so. But that was more that's not this, right? By that point, the communists were in power.
Omnipresent enemy. Okay, I just need to do makeup for a second. It's harder than it looks to be a makeup vlogger. Like, it's hard to talk while doing this. And nothing short of total revolution counts as any sort of victory whatsoever. We have to dismantle the entire system.
Well, if the entire system is unjust, then yeah, that would be the case. So you're accepting a lesser failure by taking a reformist attitude. Sort of definitionally, it's a lesser of two evils kind of thing. Which I'm not necessarily opposed to, but again, like, I don't like this slandering of people who are pointing out that, hey, this actually doesn't solve the problem. Like, if you want to argue that the problem is unsolvable, it's just the way it is and we're kind of stuck, that's one thing. But, like, referring to people who want to actually, like, fix things as being simply motivated by envy, that's beyond the pale.
Burn it all down. I guess it's pedestrian to point out that this is the revolutionary utopian equivalent of Christians awaiting the last judgment. Our kingdom is coming, comrades. Often the appeal of utopian ideology is similar to religion. It's not about healthcare, higher wages, relief from police violence. Those are actual goals that could be demanded, worked for, and achieved. Utopian ideology instead promises relief.
Hang on, okay, yeah, this is it. Let me just get that last sentence out again.
That this is the revolutionary utopian equivalent of Christians awaiting the last judgment. Our kingdom is coming, comrades. Often the appeal of utopian ideology is similar to religion. It's not about healthcare, higher wages, relief from police violence. Those are actual goals that could be demanded, worked for, and achieved. Utopian ideology instead promises relief from some general malaise. Alienation. And so ironically, it can have the same opiate effect that Marx ascribes to religion. But release from the general anguish of human existence is not a political goal.
Yeah, but okay. In very broad terms, the alienation being pointed to is the fact that people are being exploited to an extraordinary degree. We're extracting massive amounts of wealth from the world and are basically being coerced into a situation where we are not able to receive a proportionate amount of that wealth for our labor. That is the premise of the extraordinary profits that we see a very small amount of individuals having. Because again, like, it's when, like, there's this notion that we're all just sort of playing a game that we sort of we can just, like, up and leave and play somewhere else if we don't like how things are, if we don't like our employment prospects, if we don't like the wages that are on offer. But if you're in a situation where the idea that we sell our labor in exchange for a wage, and because we contracted that wage, therefore it's just. The problem is that if you're in a situation where you have the choice between, where you are presented with only the binary options of accept the contract or starve, and be a pariah, and be treated unfairly by the police, and basically have less rights and be less of a human being in the eyes of your community, then it's actually not a contract in the proper sense of the term. It's a contract that's where the signing is extorted by one party, where one party's signature is extorted from them, right? Like, technically, if you're mugged in an alleyway and somebody says, "Give me your wallet or I'll shoot you," you can decide to just be shot, and that's that's the argument of people who say that, well, it's just a thing you agree to. So there, it's fair. That's how it works. This is not the human condition, historically, of being just extremely exploited to an extreme degree. It is common, but it's not something that's sort of natural to our species. It is a thing that particular people do, and particular cultures do, and particular societies do. And it's intrinsically unstable. It has, without fail, led to the dissolution of every state, had been the principal cause of the dissolution of almost every state in which that exploitation has been ubiquitous. It was actually the reason for the democratization of Athens and for its descent into hubristic madness where they overstretch their military and whatnot, because I'm not going to get into the Cleisthenes thing again. I talk about that too much. But like the Spartans, for example, lived in constant fear of the Helots. The French Revolution, of course. I was talking about that with what's his name? The guy I was talking to in the previous stream. Like, it's not utopian to treat these things as the existential threat that they are, even from a purely cynical vantage. What is my opinion on Contrapoints videos in general? Generally, what I've seen of them is they're pretty clever and decent. I haven't watched a lot of them because they're very long, and I just don't like this kind of content generally. But I can appreciate that it's well done. This is not it. This is a bunch of forced jokes in between, effectively slander. I don't like this. This isn't clever. This isn't incisive. It's just demeaning and obnoxious. I think Philosophy Tube has overtaken her.
There's been many revolutions in the last few centuries, and so far, 0 utopias. Resentment, envy, and hunger, for that matter, are not satiated by the downfall of the old regime. When the people have no bread, they eat the rich. And when the rich are gone, they eat each other.
Okay, so who here thinks that they're starving as much as the French peasants were prior to the revolution? Like, anyone? Or how about, like, who here thinks they're worse off than the English prior to the revolution? No, we actually have had a net improvement in the quality of life as a direct result of these actions. Like, I'm sorry. Like, yeah, the revolutionists did bad things. People do bad things. I don't know what to tell you. The revolution of Toussaint Louverture, brutal. They killed a lot of people. Very bad. But you know what? They are objectively better off after that than they were before. And exactly, the point is not to create a utopia, definitionally, because a utopia means, well, it depends on how you spell it. If it's EU-topia, it's a good place, which means it's plausible. We are definitely in a better place than we were back then, even at like the low time span of a few hundred years, because of revolutions that were on class grounds, because all revolutions are basically on class grounds. Or with a U, in which case it means no place. And in that case, yeah, of course, there's no utopias, because if there was a utopia, it wouldn't be a utopia. Why does she use the French Revolution as a sole basis for all this? Because it has a reputation its reputation is defined by the terror, and not by the actual material conditions that precipitated it. People, especially like people in reactionary circles that regard, like, the demonization of the revolutionaries as all being these manipulative snakes that were just bloodthirsty. They just wanted to cut people's heads off. That's what it was all about. They generally ignore people who sort of take that view of it. Generally ignore the fact that prior to this, the peasants were being starved. People were miserable. The Third Estate had to deal with an extraordinarily arrogant end. Again, by the way, so in France, it was illegal for the nobility to take part in capitalism. They did so anyways. They were the nobility. They weren't supposed to, but they did. There's some loose connection between that and Kim Kardashian having a big beach party during COVID, right? But like, there's this sense that prior to the revolution, things were peaceful and otherwise decent, despite these misfortunes, things were at the very least livable. Whereas the revolution had a bunch of guillotines, so therefore it's the worst of the two. However, it doesn't strike me as less of a murder just because you slowly choke the life out of someone as opposed to just cutting their head off. You know? I'll recommend you Carefree Wandering's YouTube channel if you want some good philosophy video essays. I watch his stuff. He's good. He's good sometimes. He has some misfires. Oh my god. This vaccine is killing me. Take the vaccine. It's better. It's just that you're really sore the first day.
And because of the proximity effect, envy may actually increase after the revolution. You may actually be more envious of a favored comrade, a successful citoyen, oui, a kulak, than you ever were of the aristocrats. So envy turns paranoid and imaginative in revolutionary moments. It gets sublimated into morality, and the accusations start flying. That citizen is conspiring against the revolution. That peasant is hoarding grain. So the guillotine starts slicing thousands of heads off, the gulags fill up, or an authoritarian strongman takes over just to announce another revolution 2 decades later. The things people will do to stay relevant, honestly, and for what?
Why does she think this is the result of envy and not of political parties in an extraordinarily precarious situation trying to hold on to power so it's not taken from them by competitors who will undo their work? Like, why would that be envy? This is just what states have to do. Like, we're talking about societies that are in a state of effective civil war, right? Where on class grounds there are massive amounts of people with power who want the revolutionary leadership out and then dead. Why would it be envy that motivates them once they're in power? Do I plan on doing more recorded videos instead of live streams? I'm working on some at the moment. They take a very long time to do. If you actually look at my my output in terms of my video essays, they're about the same as they've always been. I've sometimes had month breaks between them because if I do a stream like this can take upwards, like this is a long video. This might take 2.5 hours to finish, or way more than that because the video is 2 hours long. But I can sit down and I can respond to a stream. If I'm doing a video essay, I have to research, I have to write, I have to record, I have to edit, I have to find all of the images to put together. That takes a long time. A 10-minute video can easily take 12 hours of my life. This I can do in 2. I can get up and leave it. And actually, when I say 12 hours of my life, I'm being a little bit, I'm downplaying it quite a bit because, like, for example, I'm working right now on a response to Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies. That's like a 600-page book. I have to read that through and take notes and then form a script. I have to form a coherent argument about it, about lots of different parts of it. And then I need to do all that other stuff. Like, we're actually talking effectively weeks and weeks of work. This is nothing. There's a reason why people stream. Also, it's just good for views. Like, my video essays, I pour my heart and soul into them, but it's just a fact of the case. They have a niche audience, right? I'm not resentful of it. It's just I got to do this. I also like responding to stuff that's real sometimes, you know. And like, let's be realistic. I could not make a video essay response to this. It would be days long. Oh no, you're not coming off as a dick at all. I'm just answering your question. That's totally fine. I get that. Like I'm especially because I have like patrons that support me for my video essays. They're coming. Don't worry. I'm still working on them. Those are not gone. This is just additional content that I can do more easily.
But what long-term egalitarian utopia results? Socialism with Chinese characteristics? So look, I do understand that sometimes you just have to do a revolution. And if I'd been there in 1789, I'm sure I'd be storming the Bastille myself. But I just wish we could stop being so doe-eyed about it. Revolution is a bloody nightmare that happens because society is collapsing and people are desperate. At worst, revolution is nothing more than a violent day of retribution.
No, it's not. It's not because society is collapsing. It's not an apocalyptic scenario. It's a thing people do because the society is thriving on their own exploitation, on their own deprivation, right? If the society was collapsing, the revolution would largely be unnecessary because it would dissolve of its own accord and there would be an open space to rebuild, right? The point is, the reason why there's violence involved is precisely because there is a thing with an exterior that must be breached in order to make actual change. I don't know how common the painting of revolution as a means that will bring you to instant utopia is. It's very common amongst people who have a knee-jerk reaction against revolution. Like, reactionaries regarded as utopian inherently. Whereas, by contrast, there are certainly people in the socialist sphere who I would regard as utopian. But when you actually look at serious, like if you compare the more serious political analysts of the socialist variety and of the anti-socialist variety, the socialist ones are, by and large, some of the most meticulous empiricists you've ever seen. These are very grounded people. Even Marx. Marx was not a utopian. Marx was extraordinarily pessimistic and down to earth. The reputation that's been made about him of being like a pie-in-the-sky dreamer is nothing but slander. He was extraordinarily serious. He belongs up there with Kant, honestly, more so than with Hegel. Like he's a rigorous, careful philosopher and analyst. Yeah, so this is where it is. So skipping was a good move because this is what's pissing people off.
Distribution, and at best it lays the groundwork for future incremental progress. But it will never usher in utopia, nor is it...
Hang on. At best, laying the groundwork for future incremental progress. If there is no groundwork for progress, if the alternative to revolution is just allowing an unjust situation to perpetuate indefinitely, it's not better to not have the revolution, right? Because you defer it to your disadvantage. Because it will happen. Because you still need it to happen. If unless you want progress to just be arrested into perpetuity, it will happen. You will make it happen. It does seem like she's critiquing online weirdos rather than serious academics, which could be seen as a fault in the premise of the video. The problem is that she is characterizing everybody who she implicitly critiques with this as an online weirdo. Right? That's the issue here. It's not... Oh, that's a good portrait of her, isn't it? It's not the argument that revolution is bloody and should be approached soberly. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's not that she's characterizing envy as a bad motive, because it is. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. The issue is that she is coloring a whole bunch of sincere and serious people who are fighting an uphill battle as being motivated by nothing but envy. Like, that costs her nothing, and it only hurts people who are making tremendous personal sacrifices to push what they think is the right thing. I don't think that's good.
The antidote to a vague sense of unease, which, I'm sorry to report, is simply the resting state of an unsedated human mind. Now, I'm not saying, as some conservatives do, that all leftist or all egalitarian politics is born of envy. No. This is a specific subtype. There are plenty of reasons, other than envy or fear.
I don't want to be rude, but this person is very wealthy for what they do. And she produces like 5-hour or so long videos in a year. They are not particularly rigorous. They are largely costume plays. And she's going to tell us what an unsedated human mind does. That's insulting. That's actually insulting. It really is. Like, this isn't even comedy gold. This is kind of weak. It's just sort of preachy and condescending.
Fear of envy to oppose an economic distribution where some people have billions of dollars while other people are dying because they can't afford insulin. Objectively, that is not an efficient use of resources to promote human well-being. And personally, I just don't want to live in a country where people are dying because they can't afford medicine, and I'm willing to pay however many taxes it takes for that not to happen. So while I'm putting down straw man versions of my argument, I'm also not saying, oh, let's just stop being envious. No. That's impossible. I think envy is like libido. It's a basic force of human nature that's more or less unstoppable. But with the right leadership, I think that envy can potentially be sublimated or redirected into something more constructive. Because raw envy is a very bad basis for egalitarian politics. It often targets the wrong people, like millionaires instead of billionaires, and eventually it turns the revolution against itself, and you get the circular firing squad, the self-cannibalism.
Well, no, it wouldn't, because this is an argument precluding revolution. Basically what she's saying is, like, this is the upshot, right? don't make systemic critiques. Don't try to actually point to problems in the actual structure of society, not in like policies and things like that. In the actual structure of society, in the actual ways in which we are, in the mechanisms we are dependent upon for the wealth that is then distributed in a very unequal fashion. Don't attack that. Just push for policies that basically allocate money to sedate you to those things. Like that's what her argument is effectively. That's what that amounts to. Because there's this little thing, like, inequality isn't just an issue within, well, it's an ethical issue, I should rather point to, within a single state, right? The wealth we have, even at this lower level, like my cheap Walmart shirts that I buy, or I guess it's from the Gap, that was cheap and affordable for me because they exploited somebody overseas. And that doesn't change because more money gets funneled into welfare.
The problem I see on the left today is that without any genuine political outlets, resentment mostly manifests as morality. Morality itself being a way to vent envious aggression and vindictiveness. On the left, we claim to be so impersonal, right? We're all about structural analysis, the material conditions, systems of power.
Hang on, she just said they have no they have no political outlet. What are they supposed to do? They're not supposed to be resentful of the fact that they've been brute forced out of the political mainstream. Don't dead name Contrapoints, please, on my chat. Natalie has been on YouTube for around a decade. The point was always online notoriety over engagement with ideas. It's just that Natalie is relatively high quality in terms of political YouTube. Maybe for her time. I don't think this is high quality at all. I think we have a lot more. I think we have a lot of really intelligent, really careful and incisive voices now. I think maybe back in the day when it was Sargon and, like, who else? Sargon and Steve Shives, maybe. Maybe this was something amazing, but I'm not digging this at all.
Intersectional identity hierarchies. But if you look at what people actually spend their time doing here, it's all this obsessive moral policing. I wonder if because leftists can't seem to win on any major political stage, we feel disempowered. And so this moral fanaticism is a psychological substitute. Like with Marie Antoinette, it's easier to blame people than systems. Also, structural analysis is very...
So just give them cakes.
Very boring, and destroying people with gossip is extremely entertaining. This obsessive moral policing also gets turned inward and becomes leftist guilt. You know, this useless, internalized scolding. I think I'm done with my makeup. What do we think? Leave a comment. I'm always hesitant to do anything about skincare. Since last time I did skincare, I was critiqued by Hiram. So I am going to spray my face a couple times with this Tatcha skin mist, if that's okay with Hiram. It feels good to finally address this feud. Clear the air. I look a lot better with makeup. I don't want to say that I don't have natural beauty. It's just that it's very much enhanced by painting like a different face on top of my face. But hey, at least this way I've kind of earned it, you know, because it's my skill. So there's a podcast called Guilty Feminist that's been running for years. And I haven't listened in a while, but in the early episodes, they'd bring on these women who would confess their feminist sins. You know, hi, my name is...
Okay, I don't care about this. I'm going to wrap it up here because I've been streaming for the last 6 hours and I'm really tired and I don't want to die of blood clots. I know you had a video reacting to Christianity not being revolutionary. That's the Jonathan Pigot video. I get your point that you want change, but do you think there is something to a non-violent revolutionary? So, there isn't really such thing as non-violent revolution, which, to be clear, is not the same thing as saying there is no such thing as a revolution that doesn't involve a tremendous amount of blood, or that revolution is uniquely violent. Because the reason why revolutions take place is because violence is already being done in a more clandestine and slow way to the people who are engaging in the revolution, right? If you're being exploited and being forced to live in relative squalor, or maybe just absolute squalor, and and like, think about this. When she was talking about, for example, like nutrition and sleep and stress and stuff like that, that's stuff that kills you. If you've been forced into a career that forces you into ungodly working hours, into unhealthy eating habits, into extraordinary amounts of stress and existential and economic fear, and loneliness, and depression, and all these different things, that kills you. That deteriorates you, and it kills you. That doesn't just make you unhappy, that makes you die. In the most vulgar terms, that is violence. I'm sorry. Now, I think that violence can also... Like, when we're talking about violence, we're not just talking about beating people over the head with a bat. We're talking about a violation against the person, against the person's interests, against the person's body, etc., etc. And if you're being effectively extorted by unfair conditions to engage in behaviors for your survival that will ultimately end your life if you don't play ball, when we have the capacity to treat our fellow citizens like human beings, I think that counts as violence. Now, with respect to a nonviolent revolution, we're going to be looking at the definition of violence there too, because a revolution that doesn't involve guillotines is not, for that reason, nonviolent. It will involve often the deprivation of people. Now, maybe it's a just deprivation. Like, I don't think appropriating the extraordinarily dishonorably acquired wealth of oh god, I forgot his name. I wanted to say Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos. How did I forget Jeff Bezos' name? The extraordinarily unjustly acquired wealth of Jeff Bezos, such that he has to live a relatively normal standard of living, proportionate to the work he does. I don't think that's like unfair or evil in and of itself, but it would be violence. It would be going against his interest, right? So, like, revolution is always violent, but then life is violent. That doesn't mean... That's not the same thing as fetishizing political murder. There are people who do that, and I think that's wrong and self-defeating. Nothing has been worse for the cause of revolution than the excesses of bloodthirsty revolutionists. But, like, it's unavoidable. Politics is violence. The word polis itself, like where politics comes from, refers to a wall, a military fortress, right? We know this, like, exactly. Like, when you look at the name is preserved in the Acropolis, like in Athens. There's that mountain, and then there's the Acropolis, literally the fortress, the castle on the height. It's a term derived from military technology. Politics is definitionally violent. And of course, liberal politics is predicated on the idea of a state of nature. We infer violence in the very basis of the state. So, it's a mistake to think that, like, while all revolution is inherently violent in some capacity, in fact, inherently violent simply, even against just the previous order, it's violent. It is a mistake to treat it as if, therefore, it bears a monopoly on violence, because it doesn't. It's in reaction to other violence that is ongoing. It's just how it is. We tend to treat violence as an inherently bad thing. It is a negative, certainly to somebody, but it's not necessarily uncalled for. Now that's talking in principle terms. When you hear about, for example, people in the Haitian Revolution killing children, like, that's not justified by that argument at all. Like, those individuals who did that were profoundly evil when they did so. Or profoundly evil either way. But, I mean, just by the by, though, like, when you... Speaking of injustice, even somebody who is arguably quite conservative in temperament, like Aristotle, he makes the point, as does Plato, that when you are unjust to a person, you make them more unjust themselves. You fill them with these negative qualities that are the product and associated matter of exploitation and violence and things like that. And in a very real sense, the exploitation that is done by the ruling classes is the author of the violence of the revolution. It doesn't obviate the responsibility of individual actors when they make decisions in real time, but it does make the idea that revolution is simply the violent choice a little bit more suspect. anyways, I think I don't want to get into her critique of online feminists. I'm already bored to death by this, and we've been going for about... How long has this been? Yeah, we're at 2 hours now. I'm calling it. This was bad. This was a bad video. This was painful. It wasn't fun. It wasn't good. It was... I don't like that these... I hate that these people get so big and they earn so much freedom to do like really good work, and they just start eating their own tail. Like, the reason why you try to get economic stability and economic security is to free you to do good things. She makes 5 videos in a year. There is no excuse for this being this facile. Isn't this splitting hairs a bit? In this context, violence clearly means bloodshed, where non-violent revolution may mean strikes, protests, boycotts, sabotage that does not violate bodily autonomy. Maybe. Although, generally strikes, protests, boycotts, and sabotage aren't revolutionary, they're reformist. The whole idea is to pressure the powers that be into playing ball with you, not into restructuring society against their will. You are coercing their will, which is slightly different. Read Locke and Rousseau. Yeah, Locke and Rousseau are important. Rousseau in particular is way more interesting than Locke, in my opinion. Locke is kind of boring. You could argue that the civil rights era was a revolution. No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, it might be a revolution in the vulgar sense of being like, this is a cultural watershed. I don't think it was a revolution, though. This was reform. This was extending institutional rights to denizens of a place who were already there, right? This is sort of like here's the difference. So let's contrast this with Athens, because that's something I'm more familiar with. When as a result of the reforms of Cleisthenes, society was radically restructured, and new political units were established, the demois, that could now vote and had effectively more political power, at least in a formal sense, than the wealthy families that formerly called all the shots. That's a revolution, because that actually constituted a structural evolution of society to something that had hitherto not been. The civil rights movement, by contrast, achieved something very important, but it was reformist in nature. It was extending rights to a group that were already predicated of a pre-existing group, right? So it was basically just giving non-whites the rights of citizens. It didn't change what a citizen meant. Like, the French Revolution changed what being a part of the state meant. Anyways, yeah, I'm losing my voice. The vaccine is hitting me really hard today. I'm given to understand that I'm given to understand that the symptoms start to go down after the second day. So I'm in the thick of it right now. Frankly, I'm doing really well at the moment compared to a little bit earlier. So I'm optimistic, but hey, it's better than COVID. Would getting rid of slavery count as revolutionary? No. Now, if you were to dismantle a society that relied upon slavery, that could be revolutionary. Revolution generally is defined by a total restructuring of the society, as in the society ceases to be what it was before, versus reform, which is changing stuff while keeping the overall structure intact. It's like a ship of Theseus thing, right? You have all of the same, you have the same thing, just the parts have been adjusted. Whereas revolution would be scrap the whole thing in one fell swoop, make a new ship. I don't want to keep you from sleep, but since it's on topic, did Marx really advocate for peaceful revolution? No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He again, this was not an optimistic man. He thought that violent revolution was effectively inevitable. Not because he was bloodthirsty, just because that's what he determined on his analysis would be the case. I think he was largely right. Like, reform definitionally is conservative in nature. It's assuming the perpetuity of the system as a whole. And there's simply no reason historically to think that it's the only way forward. It is the easier way forward in sort of an indolent sense, in that it's easier sometimes to just wake up and just do the drudgery and just, play the unfair game and then go to sleep at night. It takes less effort, it's easier, right? And if you happen to be profiting from the society in which you find yourself, then you have very little motive to, take the more radical stance. I think fundamentally this is sort of bearing out Marx's point that ethics is ultimately downstream from class interest. That is largely what Natalie is engaging in here. She has found herself to be wealthy and secure, and therefore she has no problem whatsoever with being flippant and condescending and invidious against people who are not, or people who otherwise advocate for things against her interest, because she has no external motive to get outside of her own head. That's something you learn about when you study Chinese philosophy, for example. Or even just any sort of political philosophy. It's always written by the losers, and there's a reason for that. And it's not because their political theory was so bad. Rather, it's because if you win, that is one less reason you have to actually analyze why you won. You being in a position of failure or a position of disadvantage gives you an intrinsic interest or a powerful motive to analyze the situation carefully, because you actually need to understand well in order to prevail, or in order to supply somebody else with the tools to prevail. Whereas somebody who has already prevailed obviously doesn't need that. Anyways, that's it for tonight. Thanks everybody for watching. And take care.